I'm rolling.
All right, sir, say your first and last name, spell it out for me.
Robert Stein, professor of political science, Rice University.
Thank you very much. When it comes to former Texas Representative Beto O'Rourke, what makes him, I guess, what is so fascinating about him that he's kind of taken over the country and everyone's talking about him and everyone knows him outside of El Paso?
Well, whether that's true or not is an interesting question. Let me start with what are his prospects, and that tells you something about his candidacy. Beto O'Rourke appeals to a new wave of voters, mostly Democratic, young voters, voters of color, women. These were not a dominant force in the electorate, but in 2018, not just here in Texas, but in the whole country, we saw an enormous surge. We went to 51% voter turnout in a midterm election here in Texas. Beto O'Rourke, of course, was a beneficiary of that. He had a lot of crossover Republicans, which people have not paid a lot of attention to. He does something that the President of the United States does. He's able to talk directly to his base. He can bypass the media and uses social media very effectively. He has an element of authenticity, I think, that matches the President, but I think the real common trait is that this is not a man that's really held office very much. He doesn't have much of a record. Donald Trump may have said a lot on live TV and TV shows, but Beto O'Rourke was in office for a brief six years, city council, of course, in El Paso, but there's not a deep record like a Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, or for that matter, a Bernie Sanders, which people can look at and say, but how are you on the green plan? How are you on the issue of reparations? These are issues that Beto O'Rourke can define for himself without the media going directly, so to speak, to the voters. Something else he has, and I think, ironically, a much older candidate like Bernie Sanders has this. He has raised a large amount of money throughout the whole country from a large number of donors in small amounts. Now, why is that important? For three reasons. One, money matters. Two, being able to raise it nationally, as he did here in Texas for a Senate race, now demonstrates he can raise money for a presidential race. A lot of people say, well, Kamala Harris can't go outside of California. But Beto O'Rourke has shown that in Texas, as a state U.S. Senate candidate, he was able to get money from as many as 36 other states. Two, he didn't raise it from party regulars and independently wealthy individuals or PACs. He got it in small amounts, under $100. What does that mean? It means you can go back to those donors multiple times before they even begin to max out. And you can go back to them as you gain momentum. How does Beto O'Rourke gain momentum? The primary season in 2020 is different than it was in 2016 in two very important ways. One, in 2016, it was winner take all. In the early primaries, if you won that state by 20 points or 21, you got all the delegates. Now it's all proportional. So candidates like Beto, who may not have mainstream support, who may not be household names, can begin to build on that base and get 20% of the delegates, 20% more. And as they do that, they can raise more money, propelling their candidacy into the next season. The second thing that really matters is that the superdelegates this time do not get to vote on the first ballot. Although that's a technical issue, it means that no candidate is likely to be able to go to the superdelegates. These are men and women who are not chosen by vote, but by virtue of the position they hold, senators and congresspeople, who often will go with candidates who are more traditional, better known, like Bernie or Biden. Beto doesn't have to worry about that on the first ballot. And then I think what is probably maybe more important than anything else, Beto O'Rourke, as I said before, can define himself. He doesn't get as easily defined by his opponents, or for that matter, the media. Now, does that help his candidacy or does it hurt it? That is, where is Beto on the green plan? Where is Beto on reparations? Where is Beto on the issue of Israel? Where is Beto on a whole range of issues that he's never had to vote on, where Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, or for that matter, even Joe Biden have long records. So, and Texas comes up very early in the primary season.
When it comes to those who claim that he came up short against Ted Cruz in the Senate race, how is he going to win a presidential race? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, so did Hillary Clinton. I think what his answer will be is, I can do no worse than any of my predecessors who, in the case of the previous presidential candidate, lost. And in the Senate races in the last season, he probably did as well as most candidates, Democratic candidates, bar only maybe Joe Manchin in West Virginia, and Mr. Tester in Montana. So winning in Texas is hard for Democrats. Losing in Texas is a rule. And I think what he can say is, I was with 2.5 points in a state that is the second largest trove of delegates for the Democratic nomination and the second largest number of electoral votes. But he is a loser. And I think that's going to be a moniker that I think the Democrats are going to use against him, his opponents. But I don't think he's any worse off than any of the second-tier candidates. I think Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden are probably in that first tier with a Kamala Harris. But here's what happens. You get Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. If Beto can stay alive in the top 3 to 5, coming into Texas and California, that's where I think you'll start seeing what I think is a Beto candidacy. But you've not asked me anything about the other Democratic candidate from Texas on the ballot, and that, of course, is Julian Castro. And I think the answer is that Julian Castro's never run statewide. In fact, in Texas, there's only one Democratic presidential candidate, other than Bernie Sanders, who has recently run statewide, and that, of course, is Beto O'Rourke. So what he can argue is he did better statewide than any Democrat since Jimmy Carter, and that includes even Ann Richards.
Can his momentum carry over to the Midwest states, gaining those voters?
I think it's anybody's guess. I think what you've got with Beto is a really untested, unknown at the national level. There are a range of issues. I think the Green Plan is going to be a real test for him. How do you win Democratic supporters in a state that is oil and gas not only dependent, but has defined its growth, its jobs? There are issues like guns. There are issues like, of course, reparations and what I will call the strong racial divide in the country, to say nothing about the partisan. This is where Beto O'Rourke's going to have to be, how can I say, accountable